Welcome back to another video. My name is Derek. Today we're going to be going over some simple steps when it comes to reballing. I'm going to show you some of my tips and tricks on how to properly do it. So let's get into the video. Now there are a lot of reasons you might need to be reballing. One of those might be that the factory solder that comes with some of the ICs is a high melt solder, which means you're going to need more heat to solder it onto the board. So lowering the solder temperature by swapping it out with a lower melting solder will help you install it without having to put so much heat on the board. Now, of course, this isn't optimal for all chips, but for the smaller ones, this is definitely something that I do. With regards to the larger chips like the CPU, the NAND, the PMIC, lowering the temperature of the solder isn't something that I recommend. These chips see a lot of fluctuation in temperature and therefore need a stronger solder to withstand all of that fluctuation. And there's more to it. The first thing that I highly recommend, thoroughly clean the stencil that you're going to be using for reballing. If not clean, it won't make flat contact with the chip. Therefore, when you go to apply the solder paste, it's going to get compressed under the stencil and you're going to have uneven reballing. You're going to end up with some that are larger, some that are smaller. The next thing that you need to do is choose the solder paste that you're going to use. There are a variety, ranging typically from a 138 solder paste to a 217. And there are a variety between there, like a 138, 150, a 183, etc. For example, your 148 to your 158 solder pastes are typically designed for the mid-frame when you're reballing the sandwich boards on an iPhone. And they can also be used for some of the smaller chips, like a TriStar or an audio IC. You could also go down to a 138 on those and be just fine. Now you might choose, for example, on a CPU to go from a 217 down to a 183 if you're doing something like data recovery, where you only need it to work for a certain amount of time and you're not looking for longevity, in which case it's totally acceptable to reball the larger ICs with a mid-melting solder. But if you're going with full functionality, I recommend going with more of like a factory solder on those components. The next thing that you need to make sure you have is a clean spatula or blade to deposit the solder paste on the stencil. If it's not flat, it won't deposit correctly and you will end up with an uneven spread of solder paste. The next step is ensuring that the solder paste is sufficiently dried out. I like to compress mine into a microfiber cloth to help pull out some of the excess flux so that it doesn't become too viscous while I'm reballing it. A couple things also to note is the thickness of the component that you are reballing. If it's a smaller IC, then this really isn't a factor. But when you get into reballing something like a PMIC, NAND, a CPU, all of a sudden you have a thick chip, which means that the stencil will want to warp because it's not compressed against a surface, and the heat fluctuation throughout it will cause it to deform. This is where rigging up a system where you either have something that elevates around the edge of the IC, like for example using a paper towel rolled up on both ends like a scroll so that you can have a valley between the peaks of the paper towel to place your IC and reball it so that you don't have too much of warping going on with the stencil. This definitely helps. Or using a fabricated insert where you can place the chip inside of a mold that will allow you to place the stencil on top and have a much easier time reballing it. The next thing is having the proper tweezers. For example, these ones have a nice flat edge which allow me to compress nicely on the side of the chip, preventing warping. Temperature control and airflow are also crucial. I found the best technique for myself is to start slowly in the corner, after making large circles around the area, giving it a general warming it up in an even fashion. Once the entire stencil is warm, I'm able to go in from one corner and slowly work my way across the chip, ensuring that I don't get a lot of stencil warpage and I get a proper reball. One of the first things that you'll want to do with your IC that you are intending on reballing is you'll want to remove all of the solder that is currently on it. This is easily done with an iron and wick, with the assistance of flux, but you can also add a lower melting solder to assist in the removal of the solder that's on the IC. And sometimes with the right technique, you can actually lift the stencil once you've applied the solder paste. The only chip I do this on is the NAND. When it's all said and done, what you're looking for is uniform solder balls across the IC. And those are just some of my tips and tricks on how to properly reball something like this NAND. If you have anything to add, comment it down below. Or if you have a question, ask it as well. Let me know in the comments below if you'd like to see something else in a future video. Thanks a ton for watching. We'll see you in the next video.